Hi, everyone. Welcome to Craft Politics. I'm Joseph Lavoie.
I'm Andrew Percy.
I'm Holly Monbeecroft.
How you guys doing?
Okay, I think Andrew forgot who he was then. For a second.
It's quite the delay. I don't think I'm going to edit that one out. It's going to leave the delay right in there.
No, I was just thinking like some people need no introduction. So, but also I put a suit on, so I look really smart.
You do look very smart.
Yeah, you do look smart.
Very good.
And I actually look younger as well.
Presume you've been to court or a parole hearing or meeting with your probation officer, was it?
Or a funeral. It's like, yeah, was it wear a suit for funerals and court appearances? No, I'm in Ottawa doing work.
I'm sorry. That's the town that fun forgot. What a miserable place Ottawa is.
I sense a lot of hate in your voice, Joseph, and I'm just not hate-filled like you because when I look in the mirror, I see something I like, so therefore I don't have to express my hate on others. For you, obviously, it's different.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. So, how's the rain?
There's no rain here in Vancouver.
I don't believe that. That's a lie.
Well, that is not we could not have a more Canadian opening, Holly, than us starting by talking about the weather. So let's stop, because there's nothing I hate more than starting a meeting or a discussion talking about the fucking weather.
British literally exist solely talking about the weather.
I have a weather story. Put lots of like food and stuff on my lawn food to make it grow nice next summer, and it hasn't rained.
It's called lawn feed,
and it hasn't rained, and now it's all burned. I've got my rain issues here in the UK as well.
Who set fire to it?
No, it's like a chemical burn from the fertilizer. Yeah.
So far from feeding your grass, it's killed the grass.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Looks a terrible mess.
Do you have a hose pipe you could maybe go and like?
Yeah, I thought it was going to rain, so I decided to be clever and do it just before it was going to rain, and then it would all be fine. And I got up this morning,
pretty brown. Normally,
but when you realize it wasn't raining,
to think it would rain.
Yeah, well, it would be, but when you realize it wasn't raining, I'm just trying to go through the thought processes here. Did you just look at it thinking, I thought it was going to rain?
Basically, yeah, and I thought it's too late now. No point. A good pragmatic northern attitude came out, and I put my bins out, went back in the house, and had a cup of tea.
I think Holly has just described our time in government, which was, I thought something was going to happen, but it didn't. So I just thought, it's too late now, so we'll just let it be. That's pretty much government for you. That's pretty much government. So anyway.
Guys, I'm so used to reading out comments that we get from fans in which they like to shit on us, often shitting on Percy. But look at this. This came in 5 days ago from a user who goes by Jen in Tokyo on Apple Podcasts, gave us a 5-star review and said, I was happy to find this. I follow Canadian politics closely, but I don't know much about the UK. I love having a more international focus without being too US centered. Looking forward to hearing more. That is so nice. Jen in Tokyo.
Did she say who she liked best out of me and Andrew at all? Did she mention who she thought was best?
We'll have to follow up.
She should be given an award. She sounds to me like a very, very sensible individual.
I agree, definitely.
There must be some type of Nobel Prize for that, eh?
I was, no, Trump's getting that. I was at a reception last night here in Vancouver where somebody came up to me and said, I really like listening to your podcast.
That's so cool.
Wow. Your podcast as in mine, but I was like, that's really nice. And then somebody I know in Australia messaged me and said, I really love the podcast. I think Holly's a great addition.
Well, they sound very clever. We should go back to them and ask them specifically what it is they really enjoy about what I do on the podcast, because I'd love to know that. Be great.
Or indeed what you do. So,
I know what I like. I like it when she takes the piss out of you, Andrew. I think it's great.
Talking of it, somebody asked me yesterday if I dyed my hair.
And of course the answer to that is yes.
Like, Holly and I both know our hair comes out of our head this colour.
And remarkably, when we were in Parliament and saw each other more regularly, exactly the same colour. That's a bit weird.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's because we were so close, our hair colour aligned, right? These things can happen, right?
They can.
Anyway, which colour do you use, Joseph?
Nice try.
Is it chestnut brown or is it like...
C'est complètement naturel.
No, I mean, that's not true. And saying it in French doesn't make it more true. But well done anyway. Thank you.
Let's get on with their issue scan. I don't know that our listeners want to care to hear about our grooming routines and what color dyes we use for our hair.
So you admit it then? So you admit it?
I was using the collective, the royal we.
Okay, on continue.
Let's start. Story number one that captured our eye this week. Maccabi Tel Aviv, which is a football club in Israel, has rejected away tickets for an upcoming game against Aston Villa amid a fan ban row. There's a lot that's going on in this story. So after the West Midlands Police labeled the upcoming November 6th Europa League game as a high-risk game, it recommended that the club ban the traveling inbound Israeli fans from Maccabi Tel Aviv. The response from the club in Tel Aviv is to say, no, thank you very much. We're just not. Even if you find a way to permit us to come, we're not coming. And so it's turned into a bit of a back and forth where the prime minister stepped in to try and overturn some of this advice. But it's obviously pretty important, I think, because, well, it builds off of, you know, the issues that we've talked about on the show in the last couple of weeks on what's going on in the Middle East. But I don't know what you guys are making of this story. Maybe I'll start, Holly, with you this time, just because we know Andrew likes to talk so much about this.
Andrew's raring to go on it. I mean, I guess from my point of view, I've never really given a great deal of thought to who was actually in charge of making these decisions, but ultimately expected that we would be able to police basically any football match. And I heard over the last couple of days when we started looking at this, it's not completely unheard of for this to happen, but I think it's incredibly rare. So whatever the rights and wrongs of the decision-making process, it just looks and feels absolutely dreadful to me. And presumably to a lot of other people as well. And it seems to have got to quite an advanced stage before the government came out and actually had a view on it. Although I guess it's an operational policing matter, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question is what is it? Is it a policing matter? Is it a sort of is it a national issue? I mean, there's obviously a reason why the UK government felt it had to intervene to overturn the ban. The comms around it was because this is a form of anti-Semitism being executed by the club. There's something interesting too, I didn't say in the breakdown of the story, which is that in advance of this, Aston Villa had told their matchday stewards that they did not have to work at that game because they understood that some of their stewards, quote unquote, may have concerns. And so they were informed that they had permission to skip their duties. And that was before a decision was made to ban the fans of the Israeli club from attending the game. So there seems to have been a couple layers here. I think you had this issue where the club, and I have my own suspicions on what their motivations were letting their own stewards know that they did not have to attend if they had concerns. That then turns into the police stepping in, saying that there's a massive security risk here. The club then saying we're going to have to ban them. The UK government saying it's going to overturn that ban, and then the Israeli club saying "fuck you, we're not going to come."
How much input does the club have into that decision? Because my assumption was the police would have been the ones.
Sorry, but no.
Oh, do you want to talk, Andrew?
There is so much more to this which you're missing completely, right? To be perfectly blunt about it. First of all, a couple of weeks ago, well, about a month or so ago, you had so this is Birmingham we're talking about, where Aston Villa are. You had the Tory Shadow Secretary of State for Justice talk about dangers of what he'd seen in Birmingham in terms of the lack of integration, right? So it has a very heavy South Asian Muslim population, and he talked about this, and he was roundly attacked. He was roundly attacked by the usual suspects. And in fairness to him, and quite rightly in my view, he stuck to his guns about it, right? Because we know this is what's happening. This is a city that elected a independent MP at the last election from one of these Gaza independents, let's call them Islamists, but certainly, a candidate who played sectarian politics. It's where another Labour MP, or two, but one in particular, narrowly lost to a similar sort of campaign, who was subjected to the most appalling, what she described afterwards as misogynistic, because it was largely coming from men. But let's not beat around the bush about what it really was. It was misogynistic, but it was also sectarian. So you have all this going on, but yet you have people continuing to perpetuate the myth that cities such as Birmingham are an integration success story. They are not. Then add into the mix that you have this particular these independent MPs who were elected on this kind of sectarian Gaza, Middle East politics stuff, campaigning for these fans, Jewish fans. In fact, let's remember that's what it is, Jewish fans to be banned from Birmingham. So they were openly campaigning for it, some of whom were also MPs who played down October the 7th and said things around, what had happened in October the 7th. So you then end up with it, which all leads to a decision, which a lot of local political pressure in a city which we're supposed to pretend and believe is an integration success. I'm sure there are many places within the city where that's the case, but it's also a truth and a growing truth in the UK and indeed in many Western countries that we have this massive divide in our communities, which all of this then leads to this failure to actually really say what's actually truthfully going on in these communities about the radicalization, the extremism, all the rest of it, leads to Birmingham effectively, for the purposes of football, being declared Judenfrei, right? So that's what the outcome of this is. So we've banned Jews from coming. Now, I hate football, as you know, and I think like the whole hooliganism that exists around football is like pretty awful, right? And there is obviously examples of that. One of the incidents that was prayed in aid was what happened when they played Ajax, where you had people literally.
I think it's pronounced Ajax, but yes, continue.
Ajax. Anyway, I did it deliberately because anyway. Ajax, anyway, but they're playing Ajax, right? And, there were gangs of youths at that time, and doubtless there were some Tel Aviv Maccabi fans who were also engaged in, some of the violence, but who were going around hunting Jews, right? They were effectively hunting Israeli supporters, Tel Aviv Maccabi. And that, because they were met with violence there, that is then used and prayed in aid to ban them in another football match. So what you're effectively saying, the message this sends is threaten violence, threaten to hunt Jews, threaten to go after, threaten to create a policing problem and a problem of violence, and you'll get your way. The police will cave to you. And the chief constable, this complete dweeb, has come out today and defended the decision again by saying, so we're currently down to a position of policing, which is if you threaten violence, you will get your way. And it all feeds into what so many Brits, I think, understand what's really going on, is that there is a two-tier system, right? Could you imagine if there was a far-right group threatening to create violence because a team was coming from, I don't know, whichever part of the world, and they had an issue with it? If a far-right group was threatening to cause violence, and the police wouldn't turn around and say, oh, well, because of that, then we're going to ban the match, the outcry would be about the people threatening violence. But in this situation, it isn't. That's not to say there won't be issue of violence in football clubs and all the rest of it from fans. But it's a completely outrageous decision and sends that message to, I think, lots of people. And that's why I think, again, if I'm being honest, reform are still making the political weather, right? Because this is exactly the sort of issue that says to a lot of people who are attracted to reform, there is two-tier policing, and also all this mass immigration, all it's creating in our communities is issues and conflict, and the integration isn't happening, and the consequence of that is the police scared effectively, and Jews end up banned. So completely outrageous.
What's the wrong call?
The whole thing is outrageous.
It's absolutely fucking outrageous because I feel like the club's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, and maybe it is. I may give it too much benefit of the doubt, but you have this petition from the independent MP to have this game either canceled or played in a neutral on neutral grounds, or played completely outside the country, which is first and foremost absolute fucking bullshit. And then you have the rationale of, because there's been violence at other games, we're going to use that as justification to ban these people from coming. Well, at that point, does that mean Maccabi fans should never ever get to travel anywhere around the world because they're receiving anti-Semitic violence wherever they go? And so the answer is to what? Just put our swords down, and allow that to occur. But I'm trying to understand what the club could realistically do. Other than my view is they should still welcome the fans in and say, no, like this is an open place. It is a place of community. That's when football is at its most beautiful in my mind, and use sport as a unifier as opposed to a divider, and step up to the moment.
But the problem remains there that, right, and this is what the public can increasingly see. People in positions of authority, be it the chief constable, the council leader, local Labour MPs, they can continue to perpetuate a mythology, right? About what's really happening in our communities, right? So they paint this picture of everything's a wonderful, example of fantastic integration, all the rest of it. No, actually, obviously that's the case in some parts, I'm sure, and in certain parts of the communities, of course. But actually, we have an increasing problem of radicalization in many of these communities. The public can see this is happening, and the police's response to this is, and all the things back to also that whole grooming gangs thing, of which Birmingham was also a part. It leads into this whole thing of the police will put their head in the sands when it's too hot to handle, as it were. But okay, so there are people, there are groups they'll take on because it's easy, and others we just, But so the most dangerous thing about this is it's this threat and violence, and you'll get your own way. And also where does it end, right? Football teams come, do you think of the World Cup, for example, where people are playing from all sorts of regimes that we're not happy about, right? Be it China, be it Iran, but yet we're not banning them, but yet just Jewish fans from the world's only Jewish state, they're the ones who, as I say, we declared Birmingham Judenfrei. It's a shameful, shameful position for the UK to be in. And in fairness to the Prime Minister, Starmer, and all the rest of it, they've all come out against it. But the same thing happens again. He's the Prime Minister says it's wrong, but yet it's still happening.
And also after it's happened, does this not come across? It's such a contentious issue, obviously, and something that so many people will be concerned about. Why does this not come across anybody's desk until it's basically done?
Yeah. And well, there's some suggestion that the Home Secretary knew a few days before, but also it feeds into this other thing, right, which is going on, which is we just had 2 Jews, the first Jews, I think, since Jews were re-allowed back into England in Cromwellian times, Jews murdered on the streets of England for being Jewish, right? So we just had that a couple of weeks ago, and everyone stood up and politicians stood up and said, something has to change. We can't allow this to continue. I roll back to 2017 general election where we had those 2 terror attacks, the London Bridge one, and I think was the one in Park. But there were 2 terror attacks, all in the name of the same thing. And Prime Minister May at the time, a woman I have very high regard for, I remember her standing on the streets of, outside the steps of Downing Street, saying something has to change, right? And nothing changes because we're not going in and rooting out this radical behaviour. You've seen it with this Prevent programme we have in the UK, which is, which is meant to direct people away from extremism and all the rest of it. But, even when people come out, I think it was Casey came out and did the Casey review and pointed out that, I might be wrong on whoever did the review, but said this program isn't working because it's not really tackling where the real problem is. And lots of people in the country know where the problem is, but everyone keeps saying after there's an attack on Jews or there's a terrorist attack in the name of ISIS or whichever other group, the way we're doing things in our communities has to stop. Actually, look at the polling, look at what's really going on. We have increasing radicalization, we have outside players, Iran, all the rest of it, piling money into our communities, and we all keep saying it has to stop. But yet, where are we? We've had Jews murdered on the streets and now Jews declared unwelcome in Birmingham. It's outrageous. Yeah. It's completely outrageous.
For an event that is supposed to be a unifier, sport done well is actually a way to break down barriers that exist between people. It's all bullshit. It makes me incredibly angry. And I know which team I'm fucking cheering for in this run for the UEFA Champions League. Well, I mean, I am normally a City supporter, but I'm like, my favorite team now is going to be Maccabi Tel Aviv all the way as far as it can go.
They need to make sure they keep those players safe as well. Because they've got to get on the pitch and play in front of thousands of home supporters.
What a shameful position for Britain in 2025 to be this supposedly integrated multi-ethnic country. I have to say to fans of a team from a country who, let's be honest, predominantly because they're Jewish, we can't keep you safe, so don't come. As opposed to we'll go after the people who are going to threaten you.
Yeah.
And there was a or
we're going to go out of our way to make sure you have a safe experience here.
Yeah, and there was a community leader in Birmingham who had said something along the lines of Tel Aviv Maccabi fans should be shown no mercy. No mercy. But is he arrested? I'm sorry, but this is where people would ask themselves a question. If a far right activist said, the fans of wherever should be shown no mercy, I'm pretty sure they'd be arrested. We've had someone sent to prison for a tweet saying burn down a migrant hotel, right? I think a community leader saying these people should be shown no mercy is on a par with that. But because people will say this, because she was deemed as right wing, she ended up in jail. This buffoon has continued to give interviews. Why is he not arrested for saying there should be shown no mercy? That is an open call to commit acts of violence to these people with no mercy. But he's not arrested. He's not in jail because I tell you why. A lot of people will say, and because they know the reaction to arresting him would be met with violence, right? There would be a violent response, so they won't do it. Anyway, it boils my piss.
Boils your piss. Not the first time we've heard that on the show.
No, because a lot of stuff boils my piss these days. It's a consequence of being middle-aged. As you learned about 10 years ago, Joseph.
Yeah,
anyway,
nice
I've had my rant on
that. The good news on that is that pretty soon you'll be out the other end of middle age. Perhaps it'll, wear off a bit.
If we didn't laugh, we'd cry, right? But I do think a lot of this stuff plays into the political element of this is take out everything else, right? I think it plays into the reform hands again, right? It's again, they just continue to make the weather without having to do anything.
Well, park that thought for a second, because I think we can dig into the reform thing as we move on to our next issue. So let's move on. The second story we had for you, everyone, is the following. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has said that Brexit, austerity, and weak productivity have hit the economy harder than previously thought, creating a budget funding gap that likely means tax rises alongside cost of living measures. Parallel reporting says she wants to ease inflation and create space for Bank of England rate cuts while protecting investment. And ministers are also signaling a reset with the EU to improve trade conditions. This has been reported out as the government now looking to blame Brexit for the economic conditions it needs to navigate with the upcoming budget. Okay, who wants to go first on this one?
You can have a go.
Well, so I keep fluctuating between trying to work out, look, take out the whole thing about whether you can blame Brexit or not. Like, the truth is we had the pandemic, and then we've had a whole series of international global things. And if you look at the UK economy, it's broadly performed in line with our major European competitors and outperformed many of them. So so we can argue this till the cows come home, right? But it's really impossible because of the pandemic and a whole series of things afterwards to ever really say what happened with Brexit.
However, and that's something, by the way, we did talk about with Dan Hannon on the show recently. So we have a couple clips on this specific topic with him. You can find on our YouTube channel.
So, but like, take all that about whether it's true or not, right? Which I would argue I definitely don't believe is true. I can't quite work out whether this is brilliant because, they're deploying this not against the Tories, but against reform, because who's most associated with Brexit and reform, of whether it's really brilliant or really, really stupid.
I've worked it out. It's really, really stupid. Definitely stupid.
Because actually there was a report I was reading this morning saying some people even within number 10 and even some economists who remain economists are saying you can't really make this case because you can say Brexit's a factor to lots of the underlying issues, but then so is the government's decision to add billions of pounds to employers in the national insurance rise last year, the pandemic costs, all these other things. So even some Remain economists are saying, I'm not really sure, but I suppose it's like they're kind of fighting on reforms territory a bit, so anyway, you think it's stupid.
I think it's absolutely like one of the most crackers plans I've ever heard, because basically what you're doing is turning around and saying, like, just over half of all of you, like, this is your fault, so expect to take the pain for this. And everybody's kind of going to sit there and go, like, get lost. Why would we possibly want to take the blame for this? And on the pandemic issue, like, that is a far, far more logical conversation to have with the public, to say, look, we all know what happened. It cost an awful lot of money. Look at what's happened in other countries. Like, I would have absolutely, definitely talked about that before we go back into like the most contentious thing that's happened in 30 years.
Yeah, I suppose in their defense, I think what they're doing is they're looking at the polling, which seems to show most people now think, oh, Brexit was a mistake, right? Which I think is a misreading of that polling, right? Because I think a lot of that is people say, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't have bothered. But that's different to saying, if there was a vote again and we were in those seconds, would you actually vote against it, right? So I think it's kind of like that. I don't know. It's the public can sometimes often you can hold two opinions at the same time, right? So they can say it's true. You can say, oh, I regret it. But at the same time, they don't like to be told that they were stupid and voted the wrong way. And also it's like, I think it's just kind of like you do that. Oh yeah, well I voted for it, but I don't really. I think it's, I just think you get the point I'm making, right? I think people expressing the regret might not really be all that honest, because I think people can be, oh well, yeah, but. I think it's.
Could you guys clarify something for me though? So I at first was like, I don't get this. This doesn't make any sense, because I don't understand when reforms numbers are going up and to the right on all the polling numbers, meaning they're gaining so much traction, and you've seen the Tories and Labour crashing at the same time. It's like, okay, reform's the new political threat. The blaming Brexit for the financial situation you find yourself in, to me, seems like you are effectively on a course to alienating yourself from reform voters. The only reason I think that, though, is because I'm making the assumption, this is what I want to stress test. Is it true that reform voters are one-to-one or are effectively Brexit supporters? Or is that an oversimplification of the archetype that is, sorry, I know you love that word, archetypo, Andrew, but is a reform voter by default a Brexit supporter, or are we conflating two different things?
I mean, generally they are, yes, but I think there's so you always assume, right? You can't assume people are just going to do something really idiotic. They must have based it on something. Well, we assume that, but then we tend to find out
like often. After the time we spent together, Andrew, for 5 years, are you serious?
Yes, true, fair point. But let's just pretend that they've really stress tested this and thought about it. I suspect there's two things at play, right? One is they're looking at 48% of the public voted against anyway, of which most of that was centre-left voters. So they're thinking maybe this is a rallying call to them to come behind, so maybe it works there. But also because the polling does seem to show that quite a lot of people who voted for Brexit say they regret it. But as I say, I think that means very little, because I think people can say they regret something just because it's the trendy thing to say, but doesn't mean they wouldn't vote for it again. And the polling doesn't show like a big majority want to go back in. So I think it's like kind of like a very British thing of like, oh yeah, well I voted for it, but it's kind of so I assume that maybe based on the basis of that, right? I'm thinking like, if quite a big chunk of Brexit voters either think Brexit wasn't worth it or was a mistake, maybe they think it's. But I think, but the other thing I think they're missing on it though is that you have to it assumes that people are bought into the economy, right? And a lot of people who are reform voters in the sort of communities they are not really vested in the system anyway, right? So telling them that the public finances are screwed, or telling them that all this, they don't feel invested in the system anyway. So do they really care? Because you kind of like, if you're a homeowner in London who has some investment in the system and with a good income, but a lot of these people don't feel part of the system anyway. So do they care if it's that screwed? Do they care if Brexit called it? Because they weren't invested in it beforehand. They're not invested in it now. So I think as I say, I'm still trying to work out whether I think this is good or bad.
I want to throw something in on that, on the polling, which is that, yes, if you go and ask somebody, do you think it was a good idea or not, they'll probably give you a view. It doesn't actually necessarily mean that's really high up their list of things they think about every day. You've asked them that specific question. Doesn't mean they're that bothered about it.
Yeah.
And also, if you look at the polling before Brexit, right, it was very clearly a majority in favour of remaining. So we shouldn't be surprised if polls return to that. But if you got to a referendum again, I could very easily see the route to voting to leave again, right, or to stay out or whatever, just on the basis of, you motivate people in these emotional arguments and all the rest of it, right? So I don't think it means a great deal, but I can only think that those are the two things they're going for, right? Trying to solidify that Remain vote, and also thinking they can get some of these regret voters or whatever they're called, the Brexit regret votes. But as I say, I think, I don't know, but also I think like the message coming from Keir Starmer and from Rachel Reeves to an average voter in Grimsby who thinks like they're a bunch of dweebs. I've used that word twice today. Is it going to land really? And also, it's kind of a perfect one for Farage, right? For Farage to turn around and say, oh, they're telling you you're stupid. They're telling you don't know what you're talking about yet. Look what they've done to the economy. A bit like he did when, they accused him of being racist. He just went out and said, when Starmer accused Reform's policy of being racist, he just went on TV and did his little address saying, they're telling you you're racist.
Yeah.
So now they're telling you you're stupid. So I don't know. But I mean, maybe if it demonstrates one thing, maybe it demonstrates that they're at least trying to fight back.
Maybe. I think it's on the other side of it. Go on, Joseph.
I was going to say, we're really stretching here.
Yeah, I'm trying to not just be like three kind of centre-right people shitting on Labour, right? I'm trying to think there must be some sense behind it.
To be fair, we do it to our own side as well. We're pretty equitable with that in all fairness. I think the other side of it is actually you just kind of, when you start hearing this stuff come out pre-budget, getting us ready for just how appalling and awful this is actually going to be, you just think, oh, here we go. You start getting the excuses coming out beforehand. Come on.
And actually, by budget, all you're concentrating on is what taxes they've put up and how much more they're going to cost you. You don't really care the reason for it. It's like them doing it. Yeah. It's still them doing it.
Yeah. I agree.
But you have to, if there's going to be a shitty budget, you have to precondition now. So if it is a calculated strategic move, Andrew, then That's probably what they're trying to do, set the stage for what's going to be a really uncomfortable budget.
I mean,
and trying to not blame themselves for it.
Farage, the problem is that they're facing Farage, right? And Nigel Farage is just so good at deflecting this stuff. Just like, because I mean, the other story this week is like, his wife is currently being investigated, I think, for some misuse of European funds, and all this is going on. And you think for anybody else, you think this would be kind of like, but actually, again, it's that to their voters, it's probably like, oh yeah, I can imagine many of them thinking, well, it's just a stitch up to get at Nigel, because a lot of voters are in this space of, actually, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Because he's challenging these two, the mainstream and all the rest of it. So it almost doesn't matter what, kind of, because it's just like, it's easy to go, well, it's just, of course they're going to, because the system's coming for us, the establishment's coming for us because we're challenging them. So I'd be interested to see whether any of it sticks, and maybe we'll return to it. But
it reminds me of Boris in 2019. Like, once people were connected and locked on, like they were locked on, and that was it. Nothing was going to shake it.
Same with Trump, right? You can be an evangelical Christian who is wearing a Trump MAGA hat, even though, he paid off a prostitute, he's got all these, but you just don't care, right? Because he's like, ordinarily this should be a killer, but doesn't, because it's more about that he's against the people I really dislike.
Yeah.
Right. And that matters more.
Which is a thread that got Pierre Poilievre into a little bit of hot water this week. So let's move on to our third issue. He's been on the defense over the last couple of days because he's had to clarify that some comments he made about the RCMP were not directed at the organization. They were directed at the former commissioner. So let me back up and provide some context. He did a podcast. On that podcast, he accused the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, of covering up Trudeau-era scandals, calling the Mounties' leadership despicable, and as a result has faced calls to apologize. So he has, since doing that podcast interview, he's come out and he's clarified that his remarks were directed at former Commissioner Brenda Lucki, not the RCMP itself. But media coverage in the last couple of days is all about him needing to walk it back, clarify his statements. And he's had to deal with a lot of conservative commentators being very critical about how he mangled that interview. I'm less critical. I think a lot of this is a little bit blown up, and I think some of the ways his quote was captured in mainstream media did not fully account the full context of the interview. However, I do think that it is slightly problematic for him in this moment because it gives off Trump vibes at a time when Canadians have zero interest in electing anyone who looks or sounds like Trump, and where that was a thing Pierre Poilievre struggled with in the last election, was creating the distance between the perception that he's like Trump. And why is this Trumpy? Well, because it's all about going after your political enemies, locking them up, right? Like demanding that Trudeau be investigated and potentially put in jail for his previous actions when he was prime minister. It's just not the thing I think there's broad appetite for in Canada, because it just feels too Trumpy. And so I think that's the challenge he's got. Now, on the flip side, and I want to get your views on this, guys, but on the flip side, maybe it's him shoring up support amongst his base as he's heading into that leadership review that he has at the upcoming convention
in January.
Yeah. So it could be him shoring up his base heading into the convention, but I don't know that that's required at this stage. And so I don't know whether it's a strategic error or not. And I also don't know if it's as big of a deal as it's been reported to be here in Canada.
Do you think he did it on purpose? Would it have been a pre-planned thing that he was going to say, going to talk about, or line that he would take? Or was it just something that's said off the cuff in that podcast recording and it's ran?
I think it was said off the cuff. And this is where someone, I believe it was Paul Wells, who wrote this on his Substack this week. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was his analysis, and it was very good. And his take was that Pierre Poilievre often has to be most careful when he's most comfortable. So he was on a podcast, right, with a very sympathetic audience, with his own people, so to speak. And it's in those moments where he kind of lets his guard down and rolls with the punches a little bit, and then says the kind of stuff that he said on this, as opposed to when he's doing mainstream media interview. He's much more calculated. He's much more focused, and as a result, performs well on them. Doesn't make these kind of comments or mistakes. So I don't think it was calculated. I doubt they went into that interview, Holly, with like a message event plan that said, all right, like key message of this interview is that we want to lock up Trudeau and we think the RCMP is shit. I think that was just how it came out after the fact.
Yeah, so while we're recording, maybe this will happen, but there's also some rumour that a Conservative MP is going to defect today or leave the caucus, I think potentially on the basis of some of this. And I was talking to some, just been over in Parliament with some MPs, Tory MPs, who were saying that, you know, he was asked to explain this comment to caucus today. So the fact that he's having to explain it to caucus means there's even unease in the Conservative benches around this, because it's kind of like that. So again, I'm a bit in two minds on this, right? Because I think, you know, for a Conservative to criticize the police 10 years ago would have been unthinkable, right? Because, you know, kind of like we were the defenders of the police. We saw ourselves as law and order people. When I was out campaigning this election, I went to a couple of the rallies. I remember being stood next to one Conservative MP who some of these rally people, so this is the rail base that Pierre got going, walked up to this particular MP and said, hey, I hope when you guys win, you're going to arrest this lot and put them in jail. To which the Conservative MP, who I have a lot of respect for, was like, oh, yes, yes, yes. I kind of like picked this person up and afterwards and said, hang on, don't you think that's quite dangerous, right? Because, you know, first of all, like, you know, in our system, like politicians don't direct who gets arrested, right? And but so I tell that story because it's clearly like at the base now there is this thing of like there is a bit of that in Canada with this, like, and they see in the UK as well, it's kind of arrest these guys, throw them in jail. I think that puts off more people than it attracts, particularly in the places where the Conservatives need to win. But I think the more interesting thing about this is really, you know, I can't get as excited about some of it, some folks are, but I think I think the more interesting part is that it's another continuation of trying to fight Trudeau. Like, because, you know, I think, and if you imagine you're Pierre Poilievre, right, you were going to be prime minister because everyone hated Trudeau and he was the man who was going to make you to be prime minister, and just crapping on him, quite rightfully in many cases, was a way you were going to end up as prime minister. And kind of like he got taken away from you and you still, you know, kind of like, it's almost like just move on a bit and like stop talking about Trudeau, right? Like,
I wonder if he was on his phone that morning, and you know how like your iPhone will like show you, you know, this time last year photo.
Yeah,
and it was probably like this time last year when the polling numbers were this high, and I was about to be prime minister.
Damn Trudeau. It's like, you know, the guy who was going to make me prime minister stopped me being prime minister, and it's kind of like just like it's a bit like stop talking about. You know, it's like that's like, you know, just like stop talking about
the Trudeau thing is done. I think every Canadian that despises Trudeau is satisfied by where we're at. Like the guy's out of the picture.
Yeah,
like that's all people wanted. But
he's having his best time, right? He's dating whoever. He's out all over, right?
Katy
you know,
Perry
kissing in his like short, whatever. But yeah. But all this, like, you know, is the 40 Towers sketch, isn't it? Don't mention the war. Like, stop talking about the war. It's like that. It's just like, you know, move on. So I thought like, but that's it's a kind of like, if it tells you anything, maybe it's the psychology of what's still going on here, that like, you know, Trudeau's the enemy still because he was beatable and easily beatable, it looked like. But yeah, it's exactly the sort of story that all your enemies are just absolutely going to coalesce around, right? Which is, you know, this is the Trump analogy. It's like, yeah. Anyway.
So is the clarification enough to make this kind of simmer down, or is this going to carry on bobbling away, particularly if somebody defects?
I think the problem with any clarification, right, which is the kind of like, I sort of think this is I was actually having this conversation with a Liberal MP the other day on a different issue, saying like, when you're getting into clarifying, you're getting into semi-accepting you're wrong, which means you just keep getting pushed further to kind of go further and apologize. You kind of better to hold the line, or like, you know, or not at all right. But this kind of like, oh, well, you know, I think but it hasn't, I certainly from what I heard from a couple of the members of caucus today, it wasn't really very convincing to some of the caucus folks, right? Like this whole, you know, it just should never have gone this way. And it starts to perhaps raise some questions at an unhelpful time for Poilievre, given he's going to face a leadership review of actually, is he the right person still, and all the rest of it.
Joseph, do you, I mean, as not to say, you know, Andrew, your view's not worth having on that, but Joseph, you are the expert on the comms stuff. Do you think the clarification's enough?
on the topic.
I thought Joseph was going to answer. I asked the question and then Andrew just answered it, but I really wanted to know what you think.
I think I'm clouded by the fact that I don't think it was as big of a deal as everyone made out to be. At first I got some messages saying, why is Pierre Poilievre shitting all over the RCMP? I'm like, whoa, why is he doing that? Like, that's the last thing conservatives want to be doing. Like, we always want to be on the side of the men and women who serve anywhere in public service, in our military, RCMP. We are like the law and order party. Like, it makes no sense to go after police officers. And then when I looked at it, it's like, actually not quite what he did. It's much more a story about wanting to lock up Trudeau is the egregious aspect of this. But the clarification to me is fine, but I'm now concerned. I would not have anticipated this would have been the thing that would have gotten a caucus member to potentially defect. And that to me is, I don't believe that that's the reason. I believe that is the most convenient recent reason they can point to.
And look, maybe they won't give this reason, but so I just pick up on one thing though. I think that's traditionally where conservatives were, where the men and women in uniform and all the rest of it. But as we're increasingly seeing, because of what's seen as like these organizations and institutions going woke, the police going woke, also when you think of back in, remember in BLM days when the police were taking the knee and all the rest of it. So I think at a time it was fairly solid conservative voters. We were the party of law and order, men and women in uniform, all the rest of it. I think a lot of conservative voters are now not quite in that space, but I think his personal ratings continue to track below the party, right, in all of the polling. And I suspect a bit of that gap is because of this. He's a bit too Trumpian. And that this will have reinforced that, whether fairly or unfairly, but it will have reinforced that for him. So I think it's an error on his part. Not as big as it perhaps it's not worth the coverage it's got, but at the same time, it's a silly mistake to have gotten into.
Yeah, definitely. Still trying to wage last year's campaign effectively. Okay, let's move on to our lipstick on a gerbil. So, Percy, this was your idea for this segment today. You want to give us the context before? I'm going to play the two clips.
So you have Australian Prime Minister in DC. Kevin Rudd, who's a former Labour Prime Minister, is the Australian ambassador to the US. Said a number of things about Trump and how dangerous he was before he got re-elected as president. Now he's the ambassador. This is pointed out to Trump in the meeting that this guy has said these things, and you'll hear Trump's response. So this is the Australian ambassador. So the president of the United States telling the Australian ambassador what he does wrong.
It's taken 9 months to get this meeting. Have you had any concerns with this administration, with the stance on Palestine, climate change, or even things the ambassador said about you in the past, the Australian ambassador?
I don't know anything about him. I mean, if he said bad, then maybe he'll like to apologize. I really don't know. Did an ambassador say something bad about him? Don't tell me. I don't. Where is he? Is he still working for you?
Yeah.
You said bad?
Before I took this position, Mr. President.
I don't like you either. I don't, and I probably never will. Go ahead.
This is okay. I have to love Trump's I don't know whether it is comedy, but it's actually very comic. I don't like you either.
I don't like the guy. I made that so clear on the show so many times, but he does at times make me laugh. And like Kevin Rudd sat in front of him. He has no idea who the fuck Kevin Rudd is, and is insulting him like that. But also anyone who knows Kevin Rudd knows he himself is not short on ego. So that must have stung. Okay, so that's the context for then a follow-up interview with Foreign Minister Penny Wong, because she's out having to then talk about this bilateral meeting. And so we'll play this clip right now.
There was an awkward moment in the meeting with Mr. Rudd. Kevin Rudd's previously been a vocal critic of Donald Trump. Mr. Trump said, "I don't like you," to Mr. Rudd. Do you feel for Mr. Rudd?
Look, I think those comments were clearly tongue-in-cheek. I'm very pleased that the meeting has been such a success. That is a good thing for our country. It's extremely good to have this critical minerals deal backed in, and it's extremely positive for the country to have the President so supportive of AUKUS and the delivery of the submarines, which is an important capability for us.
So water off a duck's back for Mr Rudd?
Well, Kevin did an extremely good job, not only in getting the meeting, but doing the work on the critical minerals deal and AUKUS, and the meeting reflects, the success of the meeting reflects that work.
Minister, thanks for talking to AM this.
So,
well done, Andrew. You have found a absolute belter this week. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So we now have to give this thing a rating.
Just say one thing, though, before we actually rate this, right? The ability of people on the left of politics to demean themselves, like in front of this regime, right? Well, sorry, I say regime, that's actually a wrong phrase. I hate using that phrase, but in front of this administration. So Kevin Rudd thinks all these things, but then he's there like, before I got this job though, Mr. President, I said these things. Like, these people have no shame. It's like Lord Mandelson, right? All these things. But one, the power of the United States, right? But kind of like, just have some self-respect for yourself, right? Like, just be like, yeah, I did think that, sorry. But like, oh no, I don't think it now. It's just this demeaning. It's like absolutely demeaning. Anyway,
I love the bit when Trump basically says, like, I don't like him anyway, and I probably never will.
Probably never will.
Never will.
It's great.
Absolutely. Just like the delivery is just like so deadpan.
With Rudd right in front of him. It's just like,
I have to run to this meeting, so can we score it then?
Yeah.
Joseph, you need to go first.
Ollie, what are you giving it?
No, you go first.
Okay, so we are scoring the foreign secretary's follow-up interview, right? One coat. Here's my rationale, because we define that as barely concealing the problem. I think that's what she did. Tried to pivot. All you can do is pivot, right? So she pivoted to, hey, we still had a good meeting. We still got a good deal. I think the part that probably no one believes is how instrumental the ambassador probably was in securing these meetings. My guess is those meetings were secured because there's a bilateral need naturally there. And if Kevin was so instrumental in those, I'm pretty sure Trump would have had something maybe a little bit more flattering to say about him. So I'm going to give it one coat.
I agree, one coat. And when she said, like, he did really well to get this meeting, like, all three of us, our eyebrows just went, woof, like, right over the back of my head. We're like, really?
Oh, that's such bullshit.
Yeah, wow, you went
Come
there.
on.
Yeah, one coat, but like, I just cannot say how much I enjoyed the whole thing. Fantastic.
Yeah, great. I think one coat too, but in fairness to her, she kind of didn't miss a heartbeat though. In just kind of she was. It was a good performance in the sense of like she, didn't skip a heartbeat and just didn't skip a beat, just thinking. But like one quote in terms of any covering it. So.
Yeah, the pivot was good. Let's get back to what matters. It's the deal. It's this. It's that.
But he was just joking. No, he wasn't. He really doesn't like you, and he probably never will.
It's going to go into our repertoire as well. We're going to look at somebody and go, and I probably never will, and look knowingly at each other and know exactly what we mean.
It's like this. I have to tell this now. There's the best argument I ever saw in the street between two people who were a bit out of their head on something, and one guy says, "What's your problem?" And he's like, "I don't like you." And then this guy goes, "You don't know me." And he's like, "I know I don't like you." The best thing I've ever seen in a street argument is like, "You don't know me. I know I don't like you." Anyway, well, I better run because I really am going to be late.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for listening, everyone. You'll catch us on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and at craftpolitics.fm. We'll catch you next week.
So everyone, take care.
Ciao.
Bye.